Guys of Reddit, what did your girlfriend's dad do to establish dominance? Story 1 haven't even exchanged names yet. The guy puts his finger on my chest. I look down, and of course flips it up into my face. Laughs so hard. I was not expecting that, but it's just who this guy is. Story 2. Clammed up, basically acted as if I wasn't there, and if I did talk to him I got single-word answers. This is an actual conversation when I was stuck in a car with him. What do you do? Sales. Been doing that a long time? Yes. How many years? 30. Retiring soon? Yeah. What are you planning to do when you retire? Florida. Where in Florida? West. So, like, Tampa? Yeah. My girlfriend gets a text the next day from him saying, I'm a great guy and he's happy she's dating me. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Should also mention that he sounds exactly like Bill from Kill Bill. Story 3. I flew overseas to meet my wife's family and ask for her hand in marriage. Made reservations at one of the fancier restaurants in town and asked him to meet me there for a talk. Should add that I was unemployed and completely broke. He pulls up in a BMW, tires screeching, and tells me to get in. I protest that we have reservations and he says to forget about them. He takes me to a really simple coffee shop, says that I don't need to impress him with fancy. I tell him that I love his daughter and will always make sure that she is happy. He just looks at me for a long time, not saying anything. Finally, he says, I don't know you, but I know my daughter, and she's really smart. So many guys wanted to marry her, and she turned them down. If she sees something in you, then I'm all for it. We shook hands, and then we drove to the supermarket so I could help him haul a ton of groceries. My wife and I have been married for 15 years, and he's always been a complete gentleman to me. Even though I showed up in his city completely broke and jobless, lived under his roof and ate his food, he never once made me feel that he was doing me some kind of favor or that I was anyone but a valued member of the family. And this despite the fact that he has a nasty temper and never holds his tongue with anyone else. I worked my off and got back on my feet, and my wife made big leaps in her career as well, and eventually we moved back to the States. He continues to be my ideal of what a real man should be. I hope to treat my own daughter's husband as well as he treated me. Story 4. My ex-father-in-law never did anything to really establish dominance. He shook my hand and looked at me and asked how I was doing. About 7 months later, when she was my girlfriend, we went and told him and her mother that she was pregnant. But we had already started saving extra money and had a plan for when the baby was born. This was in 2002. He once again shook my hand and thanked me for actually being a real man. Eventually, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and we moved in with them so we could keep a better eye on him. I ended up with not only another father figure like my grandfather, but a best friend. We did everything together and had a lot of fun. We'd pick on each other so much it would easily get out of hand, much to the rolling of eyes of our respective wives. He went missing a couple of times, went for a walk and got turned around, and then went for a drive and got lost. I was terrified but kept my composite and didn't stop looking until we found him, hours later. He was a stereotypical Texan with a lot of guns, cowboy boots, and hats, but with a heart the size of Texas itself to match. Fun fact, when his daughter, my wife, ended up cheating on me, which led to separation and divorce, she thought it was okay to bring the new guy around a couple of months after our daughter and I moved back near my family. He excused himself and come back with one of his shotguns and simply proclaimed, "You're not Nemesis," and the guy actually pissed himself. He told me about it later on the phone, cracking up, and he said, I'm not as far gone as they think sometimes, and he told me that I will forever be his son. I miss that Texan. Story 5. My father just happened to be cleaning his guns and trying out his bore sight when I brought my boyfriend home the first time. A table full of rifles and shotguns. My boyfriend's reaction was, oh neat, and they talked about the guns for an hour. They went without me to a blacksmithing festival recently. I think all I did was bring home a friend for my dad. Edit. Bonus fact, they are going to make a forge together out of leaf blowers and an old water heater tank in the backyard. Edit 2. They both super appreciate the amateur blacksmithing advice, you made their nights, and the forge inches closer to completion. Thank you, blacksmiths of Reddit. Story 6. Watching a movie with my girlfriend, I'm wearing my Alabama hoodie and he saw it. We were in the basement and she got a text from him which was a picture of a bed with all Alabama covers, pillows, etc., with the caption, when you're ready for a sexy night with your cousin. I took the hoodie off and left in shame afterwards. Story 7. Found out he was a high-ranking official for the Secret Service in Poland during the Soviet era. He doesn't have to do anything more to terrify me. Edit. I married her. Best decision I've ever made. She's much prettier than I am. Story 8. Told me he worked for the Ministry of Defense, that his job was very high security clearance and potentially dangerous. Basically portrayed himself as a kind of spy, and he'd published some papers on counterterrorism methods, so it at least kind of tied together with his academic interests. I never really found out what his actual job was, or if he was bullshitting me. But I do know that his daughter didn't know much more than I did, and that she was unable to legally declare his income for the purposes of student finance assessments, which does kind of support the idea that his salary isn't supposed to be a matter of public record. Story 9. He actually didn't do anything himself to terrify me, but my GF did it for him. She told me all about how her grandfather, his dad, was a legitimate lumberjack and how he, her dad, was pretty much one too. He chopped for fun, and at one point his arms were so big that he had to cut the sleeves off his flannel shirts. He also used to bow hunt, camp for days, and works out a lot. He's the manliest man I personally know, which is a stark contrast to me. He is a really nice guy, and has only made me feel slightly uncomfortable with his sarcasm. Story 10. Shook my hand real firm and asked, "Hello, are you fucking my daughter in your apartment?" No introduction, wouldn't let go without an answer. I'm really tall and he is a short, stocky wrestler. 14 years later, still together. Edit. It was suggested that I put my answer here, so I will answer below. I believe she interrupted with "Dodd," and we kept firm grip. We locked eyes, silence for a few seconds, and I said, "Pleased to meet you, sir." He said nothing. I knew that he knew. We both knew. Story 11. I was 17 at the time and was really into his 16-year-old daughter. He sat me down at his kitchen table for what I thought would be a talk. Instead, he pulls out a length of rope and demonstrates step by step how to tie a proper noose for hanging someone. Story 12. A dad cleaned a pistol in front of me. That said, I thought that he already knew that my dad was a cop, and that he figured I thought guns were cool, which was true. I truly thought he was trying to relate to me. In hindsight, I guess not. Edit. Grammar. He was never always neutral, friendly. Korean war vet and nuclear engineer. He had mad tech knowledge of his hobbies. Story 13. He made me a bet. If I could catch 3 footballs while his daughter is covering me, I would have his respect. Not the strangest bet I've made, but whatever. I ran 3 different routes for each one. Caught the first 2. Last one, I didn't know this about my girlfriend, but she is a huge Deion Sanders fan. Ball goes up, she caught it, and in the process elbowing me in the eye and giving me a black eye. Story 14. I live in Langley, Virginia. The other thing that lives in Langley is the CIA. A girl I asked out in my freshman year of high school had her dad drive us to the mall. No biggie. I'm a fairly confident person, and there wasn't much of a plan to fool around at the mall. All part of his plan, I'm sure. Anyway, we get into his pickup truck and I'm in the back. Dude's wearing a navy dress blue uniform. I see he's a petty officer. I know insignia, because I was a sea cadet. I'm idly curious and want to make small talk so the dude likes me, so I check out his other insignia when he turns around and talks to me. Red chevrons and a trident. Dude was a fucking Navy SEAL. Never mentioned it, but you could tell he knew I knew. Subtle, yet effective. I give this boyfriend scaring method an A+. Story 15. I once came to a girl's house to pick her up for a date in high school, and her father answered the door and said, "Come on in." So I followed him inside to discover the dining room table covered in disassembled firearms, and he casually sat back down, resuming oiling and assembling everything, looked up and asked, "So what are you kids up to tonight?" Story 16. My father-in-law held some title for state boxing champ in his home state back in the day. The first time we drove over to see him, he was drunk and had a huge cut across the bridge of his nose. Apparently, he had beat the out of 3 20-something-year-old bullies the night before when they decided to jump him at the bar. His 70-something-year-old dad was mugged in his own home one time. My father-in-law found the guy who did it, followed him inside his house and broke his knees and elbows. He then proceeded to beat the out of the guy to the point of brain damage. In his words, "If they can't talk, they can't identify you." Dude is chill as every time I'm around, and thanks me every time I see him for getting his daughter out of the hole they lived in. But I know for a fact if I ever break her heart, he'd fucking bury me. If I ever leave, it'll have to be the country. Edit. Holy smokes, this blew up. Some clarification based on the comments below. The muggers didn't just break in and take stuff. They waited until my wife's grandpa got home, followed him in, and beat the out of him. Put him in the hospital for like a week with broken bones and stuff. Not justifying what my father-in-law did, but just clarifying that it wasn't a total overreaction. Secondly, I'm safe, my wife is safe, and no, I don't need an intervention. My father-in-law is actually a super cool guy who has never given me trouble for a second. He will call me up out of the blue and thank me for taking care of his daughter, because he knows if she wasn't with me, she'd have probably ended up with one of the assholes she'd been dating around there. Story. 17, my ex-wife's father, actually a pretty cool guy, 1 year at Christmas. I was trying to open a package that my nephew had gotten, and my father-in-law said, "Just use your pocket knife." I said, "Sorry, I don't carry a pocket knife. I'll go get one from the kitchen." He said, "What kind of a man doesn't carry a pocket knife?" I sat there for a minute, trying to think of a response, feeling pretty low. He started laughing and said, "Sorry, Shirley's, mother-in-law's. Dad asked me that one time, and I've been waiting to use it on you." My ex-wife and I are still on pretty decent terms. He passed away recently. It was a really sad thing, knowing that he was gone. Story 18. Shot me, point blank. With a Nerf gun. No warning, just a dinner I was having with their family. All he said was, "You try any funny business, you'll get the or nothing." Edit. Holy, this blew up. Thanks, guys. And this was in 1999-6-ish. It was amazing on his part, gotta say. Story. 19, my wife, girlfriend at the time, is Japanese, so we flew to Japan so that I could meet her dad and ask for her hand in marriage. At dinner, he pulled out the whiskey and beer. Turned out to be a drinking contest where I had to match him, drink for drink. Problem is that I'm 6'5" tall, got 25 lubs on his, and I'm Mexican-American. Insert stereotypes here. 3 hours later, he was shit-faced passed out, while I was at the mini-mart buying a six-pack to drink on my walk back to the hotel. That night, I became a family legend. Story 20. He sat down on the couch next to me, shirtless and just wearing long underwear, and said, "Let's play a game called, let's see how uncomfortable we can make Trevor." My name isn't even Trevor. Then he proceeded to take me up to his bedroom and tried to coerce me too into smoking pot and doing mushrooms, even though I told him I had never done drugs, never wanted to do drugs, and was expecting to be drug tested as I was trying to get into the military. Eventually, he backed off, but he was always pretty weird. Story 21. This is what my dad did when my sister's boyfriend came home the first time. Just sitting at the table, sharpening the kitchen's knives. I still don't know it. It was a coincidence, my dad says it is, but my mom and sister make a really good point. He had never sharpened knives for the kitchen before. The story of my dad waiting for him sharpening knives has been told in the whole school for a couple of years. Story 22. We got quite drunk the first night we met. I took his side over hers in a debate they were having. He grabbed my face and kissed me on the lips. Years later, walking her down the aisle, he said to me, "She's your problem now. TLDR, I have an awesome father-in-law." Story 23. Gay dude here, but I'm quite a bit more masculine than my fiancé, so I'm going to count myself in for this question. I think it's also a good story for its contrast with all the gun-toting, axe-wielding knife sharpeners in this thread. The first time I met my then-boyfriend's parents, his dad invited us along to go to the opera with them. I'm from a blue-collar family and had virtually zero clue what was going on and could hardly understand anything. It was a pretty mind-boggling experience. Then he took us out for a 400-plus dinner and insisted I have a couple really good scotches after. I was like, I hope your son doesn't expect to keep living like this because I'm poor as in comparison. Story 24. Background. I had recently started dating my girlfriend and had met her dad one time. I had left a bottle of whiskey at my girlfriend's house. She was out of town for the weekend, so I asked if I could sneak in and grab it. I came in and yelled to see if anyone was home, and no one replied. I went upstairs to grab my bottle, and in burst her dad with his hands raised asking who I was and saying he was a judo champion. He then realized who I was and we said an awkward goodbye, haha. Story 25. He didn't. I don't play that silly game, neither did she, and thankfully neither did he. It was, "You seem like a nice guy and I trust my daughter's judgment about you." None of the nonsense of scaring the daughter's boyfriend that shitty dads like to do. Edit. Thank you, kind stranger, for the gold. It's much appreciated. Story 26. Dated a girl back in high school who took me to her grandparents for a family reunion type meal. Sometime after the dinner, her grandfather took me outside to talk, and we started walking towards his workshop. So he opens the door, and suddenly I am staring down the barrel of a cannon. Not a model, not a toy. A fully functioning Civil War cannon surrounded by all manner of historical weaponry. Muskets, rifles, swords, bayonets, battle axes, even a fucking suit of armor. You name it, old boy collected it. Needless to say, I knew right then and there that Gramps didn't around and I probably shouldn't do anything to really of his granddaughter. Story 27. There was that one guy who slept in his girlfriend's basement, and some mornings the father would come down and masturbate on the computer, which was right next to the couch the kid was sleeping on. Story 28. Well, my ex's dad physically beat the out of her entire family, so there is that. Luckily, she moved out into her own flat. And then after we broke up and fell out, she managed to go to uni. I'm really happy for her getting out of such a bad situation. Story 29. Showed me his guns. Girlfriend didn't know at that stage I'm a gun nut. So her dad didn't know that far from being intimidated by it. It was like fucking Christmas. Holding a .308. Did Vicky tell you I hunt and kill my own meat? No. Well, this is one of my many guns. Want to hold it? Dude, nice rifle. Is that glass the new Zeiss Victory? Do you shoot at the range much? We should go hunting next year, man. Etc., etc., etc. Ended up late for dinner, 'cause me and the old man geeked out for too long. Story 30. The first boyfriend I ever brought home to meet my parents. Gave them the "don't embarrass me" speech beforehand. All was well. We went up to my room to watch a film. My dad knocks on the door and walks in with an axe in his hand, doing the whole "what are your intentions with my daughter" thing. Poor boyfriend ran out of the house and I had to pick dad up off the floor as he was laughing so hard. The ex and I are still friends. Still asks me if I remember the time my dad chased him with an axe. Story 31. He introduced himself, told me about his profession, a surgeon. Then during the conversation he slipped in the line, "Oh, and if you get hurt I can give you personalized care. Or finish you off. It all depends on how you treat my daughter." Oh, and he had some crazy eyes too. Always too wide open. Story 32. My method will be this for my daughter. I'll shake his hand, give him some money, tell them to have a great time, go eat, etc. But then ask for his mom's phone number to emphasize that he's still a goofball kid, and if there is an issue, I'll take it up with mommy. Story 33. I'll always remember my first date with one girl in high school. I drove over to pick her up, and her dad opened the door. "She's still getting ready, but we'll be down in a sec. Why don't you come in and sit down?" Her dad and one of his friends were hanging out in the living room, and I'm pretty sure they had been drinking for a bit. I'd never met either of them before and didn't even know the girl that well. I was 17. After basic small talk, he asks abruptly what I'd do if I died and was standing before St. Peter or whoever and was asked why I should be led into heaven. I stumbled over a bit of, "Well, I always helped people and lived a good life," while he and his friend shook their heads. I suddenly remembered that they were Baptists. But most importantly, I found grace in Jesus Christ, which pleased both of them immensely. Next, her dad asks what I would do if I just got a brand new Mustang, and at the gas station he came up and asked if he could borrow it for a day. I had no idea where he was going with this, but his next line was, "Isn't that the same thing if I let you take my daughter out tonight?" I was taken aback and was close to arguing that his daughter was sentient and not a car, but thankfully she came down and interrupted that with an, "Oh, Dad, stop," and we left shortly thereafter. Growing up in the Bible Belt was fun. Story 34. Told me to eat more the second time we had dinner together. A real hard-ass, right? The first time we met, I gave him a carton of Mao's favorite brand of cigarettes. He is Chinese and a smoker. We can't communicate much in English or Chinese, but I'm pretty sure he likes me. Her mother, on the other hand, has done everything short of putting a shotgun in my mouth and making me promise I'm not wasting her daughter's time, including pressuring me to buy a car, even though I live a 15-minute walk from my office, and public transit is as fast as driving. Story 35. The first time I ever went to my girlfriend's house, her dad busted open the board game Ticket to Ride and proceeded to utterly destroy me. As he stole the last possible way for me to get from New York to Los Angeles, he looked me in the eye. He knew what he was doing. 5 years later, I still have never beaten him. Story 36. So this one girl and I were in her room, and I was hitting it from behind. We didn't think anyone was home, so she wasn't being too quiet, but she was up, face down, buried in a pillow. The train had just started to pick up speed when I slowly see the bedroom door open. It's her dad. We lock eyes, and he slowly brings his finger to his lips in a shushing sign. Like I said, we were already in Vinegar Strokes territory, so there was no stopping at this point. My pumping got more furious and more erratic. Her screams got more intense and her motions more accepting, and he just kept eyes locked right on mine. Her and I both groan as we and he just keep staring, eyes locked. She collapsed on the bed, and I fell back onto my heels. He slowly backed away and gave me a winky shooter hand just as the door swung closed, never broke eye contact. Story 37. Well, my girlfriend's dad was an ex-Green Beret in Vietnam and has over 100 confirmed kills, several service medals, and has done so many things he doesn't like talking about them. And he's been nothing but nice, treats me like one of the family, and gives me a big warm hug every time we meet. Her mom's the scary one. Story 38. Cut his daughter off for the amount of time she was with me. He didn't assert dominance towards me because he was madder at the way she acting with me more. He also had a grudge against me, so he just stopped talking to her, buying her things, said he wasn't going to our wedding if it happens. More like passive when I think about it. Story 39. She wasn't quite my girlfriend at the time, but she did have a giant crush on me, and we eventually did hook up. But the first day I met him, he said, in a car with a bunch of her friends, that if I wanted to date his daughter and wasn't careful, he'd shoot me with his crossbow. The worst part is I didn't even necessarily want to date her, but it was still a little disturbing. Story 40. My ex-GF used to know this guy, we'll call him Sam, who just came out, but his dad worked for the military and was overly macho about everything. Anyway, he was absolutely horrible to Sam once he found out because I guess he couldn't fathom that such a macho man could have such a feminine son or something. Anyway, Sam was at culinary school abroad and was back to visit his dad, and partially to also finally come out of the proverbial closet, and invited my ex and I to a fancy dinner at his dad's. My ex was going to be late, so I went in alone and was greeted at the door by the guy's dad. He looked me up and down, grabbed my hand real tight, and pulled me in real close and looked me in the eyes with absolute rage. He then started to tell me how he worked really hard to be able to do what he's done, but some people were ungrateful. He then started asking me if I've ever fought a man before, and if I had to take on a man twice my size. I was so confused and actually felt really intimidated and out of place. Then his dad took me to his man cave, a room full of Navy memorabilia, and a giant sailfish on the wall with a bar full of expensive whiskey. He then asked if I could drink like a man. I refused because I was driving, and he then said that I wasn't even man enough to be with his sausage muncher of a son, let alone his daughter. It was then that I realized that Sam's little sister just got a new, and he thought that I was him. Poor Sam. Poor little sister and her future boyfriends. That man was such an... Story 41. Approaching car to go to dinner with parents, he steps around and opens the door for his wife, then looks at me. Obviously, I scrambled to do the same for my GF. Honestly, the best move I've seen. Respect her, be polite, serve her first. No need for dramatics, but the message was clear. Story 42. My ex's dad was a 6'5" ex-linebacker working as a doctor and had a black belt. He also dabbled in making his own fireworks for fun. That man didn't have to establish dominance. I understood that he could kill me in any number of ways. Story 43. He's blind. He asked if he could feel my face to get an idea of what I looked like. It was awkward, but my GF, A, was smiling brightly, so I felt a little proud. He stepped back, shrugged his shoulders, and said, "A, you can do better, A." He's my father-in-law now, and one of the funniest and smartest men I've ever known. Story 44. Nothing. And now my mother-in-law quietly alerts me to when there is grilling to be done at their house so I can do it before he does, because he overcooks everything. Story 45. My fiancé was in an abusive relationship before we dated. Dad met me with joy after I genuinely smiled and shook his hand when we met. Now we golf, chalk, fish, and hunt together when we can. My dad passed last year and hanging out with her father is always a pleasure. Story 46. My girlfriend's older brother and her dad cornered me at a party, and her older brother said if I ever did anything to upset her, he'd off me. He's not gay. The party was for his baby's baptism. Story 47. He pulled me into the laundry room and made me help him fix the washing machine. It was odd, but after he realized that I had a general grasp how to use tools, he seemed to lighten up. Also, asking him to help me replace the radiator in my first car was a plus. Love that man to death. Too bad his daughter is a psychopath. Story 48. Italian girl, very Italian dad and uncles. Meet them for the first time and they try intimidating me and asking what my intentions are. I legit respond politely how I hope to have an excellent relationship with her and how I grew up in the Midwest and dad is a minister, etc. They turn to my girlfriend and say, "What are your intentions with this young man?" Story 49. I am the girl. But when my partner met my dad, my uncle joked about him giving my partner the talk. But my dad was like, "It's not my place," which I thought was pretty cool of him to acknowledge because he was absent most of my life. Then, he and my uncles made fun of my partner for having long hair and said he probably wears my underwear when he's alone. That was funny. Story 50. When I was in high school, I dated a girl who lived way out in the woods. She had always driven to my house to hang out or we would meet somewhere. Well, one day we were going somewhere nice and she wanted to dress up. I told her we would make it a formal date and I would pick her up at her house. She warned me of how her dad was kind of wild and he would be home. I told her it would be all right, I ain't no. Well, the time came and I'm pulling down the driveway and as I get to the house, I see him. 6 foot. No shirt. Mullet cut off acid wash shorts. Dip spit all over his face. Chopping with an axe, I can only imagine being a modified Thor hammer. I mean, this man is splitting logs bigger than me. I get out of my car and he stops. "You here to pick up my daughter?" "Yes, sir." "She's going to be a minute. She's still getting ready. Here, help me a minute." And he tossed me a smaller but nicer axe. So I helped him chop in my nice clothes for about 30 minutes. I was afraid if I said no, he would chop me. We ended up bailing on the nice restaurant and eating McDonald's and banging instead. Her dad ended up being one of the nicest guys ever, but that initial meeting was intimidating. He slept in his recliner every night with his shotgun in his lap. Story 51. We were eating dinner, and the knife he used to cut the steak was not a normal knife. And whenever he was talking to me, always mad hand gestures with the knife on his hand. Then he used the same knife to cut the apples, and had the knife on his left hand when we shaked hands before leaving. I was a little bit scared, TBH. Story 52. I dated this girl in the 10th grade. When I went over to her house for the first time, her dad beckoned for me to follow him downstairs. I followed him down the dark and dusty stairs into the garage where he flipped a switch to reveal a bullet press. He showed me step by step how he personally makes bullets in his garage. The truth is, I didn't even realize this was an intimidation move until my dad pointed it out after I relayed the story later. I just thought the process was neat, so I asked a bunch of questions. I remember him being slightly confused that I wasn't really getting the hint, but he was happy enough to answer them anyways. Now, the horrible twist of fate is that a few years later, long after that girl and I had broken up, her dad committed suicide via gunshot, so I guess that lesson kind of backfired. Story 53. Late to this party. But back in 2009, my then-girlfriend's dad joined us at a college party and walked up to me, wordlessly grabbed my drink, and chugged it in its entirety before handing the can back to me. He's a funny guy who was fond of me. It was a mostly ironic gesture of dominance. Kind of a joke. Joke was on him, though. That drink was a bona fide, caffeine-laden, 22 Oz 4 Loco. Story 54. My dad told my boyfriend he reminds him of the song Rosalita by Bruce Springsteen. It's about a no-good dirt-poor musician sleeping with this guy's daughter and convincing her to sneak out of the house. Story 55. He caught us having in his living room and proceeded to almost throw me over the deck balcony. And then he drove me home in silence. I was not sure I was going to live to see 16, but that was that. Story 56. Be a 6'5", 250 lb sheriff's deputy. I knocked on the door, introduced myself, shook his hand, and we had never had any issues. She said I was the first guy who wasn't intimidated and stuttering when meeting her dad. A few others just weren't intimidating or weren't trying to be. Not really sure. I was a bit of a smartass, but never rude or disrespectful to anyone, never in real trouble, and worked hard, so I think it was, hey, could be worse. My wife, whose father I never met, intimidates me more than any of the fathers of my exes ever could have, LOL. Edit. My wife scares me. It's a joke I phrased poorly, apparently. Story 57. He left them. Things went from peachy keen nuclear family one week to me coming to pick her up, and the parents never stopped fighting. Turns out they were fighting over me, Specifically the fact that the father didn't want his 14-year-old daughter dating a 16-year-old and the mother didn't see anything wrong with it. Few weeks later, he up and left. GF ends up blaming me and hates me for the rest of her life. Story 58. Only time I had a dominance show was a mom. I showed up sort of unannounced at 9:30 p.m. and knocked on the front door. She answered it, shouldering a high point. 45. I was sort of prepared for a joke like that, so I smiled and cheerfully introduced myself. She glared at me, an attempt to intimidate, and said, "Most people freak out when they see a gun. Most people don't notice the open bolt and missing magazine. I like this one." Story 59. My family will never admit to it, but it's happened to many times to not be on purpose. I have 5 brothers, all ranging from "that's a big dude" to "Jesus, he's a giant." Also have a dad who through a lifetime of hard work is about as soft as a brick wall. Something no one ever expects when they see all 5 foot and 100 lbs of me. Mom died giving birth to me, so these guys are what I got. Every time I'd bring a boy home to meet my dad, him and all of my brothers meet him in our kitchen, which is hardly big enough to turn around and much less contain 6 huge men. It terrified a good share of my boyfriends. The only one that was never fazed was my husband, but he's equally the size of any of them. Story 60. Guy was a big fucking dude. Construction, I think. Drove a big fucking truck. He saw my car at a party house in high school. Offered to drive me home the next week after spending time at his house. Now I'm this little high school, sitting alone with this hulk of a man in his beast of a truck. We pull up to my house. I go to get out. He grabs my fucking arm like King Kong grabbing the little that I was. "I saw your car at a party this weekend. I will literally beat your if she ever goes with you." That's it. I get out. Go to my room. Cry. Story 61. First time I met my now ex-girlfriend's father, he decided to take me clay pigeon shooting. I had only fired a shotgun once before, but had done a lot of rifle shooting through various cadet organizations growing up. He was unaware of my experience with firearms and so was a tad patronizing about explaining things. He said, "Don't worry if you don't hit anything." Well, this was all I needed. I smiled and said, "I'd try my best not to waste our money. Out of 50 clays, I hit 38. He has been shooting for around 3 years and only hit 34. He was not pleased, but I passed it off as beginner's luck. Felt amazing all day, though. Story 62. Tangentially related, but I brought a male friend over when I was in the 2nd grade to work on a project. My dad, for some fucking reason, felt the need to take this kid, sit him down, and have the "what are your intentions" talk with him. This included asking him what he was going to do after college, what career he wanted, what his life goals were, all with a gun on his hip and while talking down to him. I repeat, friend, school project, 2nd grade. My dad seriously asked a fucking 8-year-old what he was going to do with me and how he was going to support me later in life. The man now has the audacity to ask me why I don't have a boyfriend. This is why.